and PwC into their executive survey report for 2022. This series has long tracked manufacturers' expectations and provides insights about the sector's potential for growth, challenges and opportunities across the UK and globally. But this year's report is especially interesting, coming at the end of the unprecedented 2-year turmoil of COVID and Brexit, a period that has seen net zero come to the forefront of ambitions for both governments and companies, and put skills and technology at the vanguard of the many change programs around the country designed to boost flagging productivity. Throw in the cost of living crisis, sparked by the spiraling energy bills and materials and wages, the prospect of higher taxes and a flip-flopping government over industrial policy, well, it's been quite the ride and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. So we have a great panel of speakers take us through these issues and out the other side. We have from Make UK Chief Executive Stephen Phipson and Policy Director Verity Davidge, as well as Cara Haffey, the Automotive and Manufacturing Leader at PwC, joining us from Belfast. Adam Hawksbee, Deputy Director of the think tank Onward. Seema Malhotra, who's the Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Business and Consumers. Mark Pawsey, Conservative MP and Chair of the All-Parliamentary Manufacturing Group. And lastly, from the industry, we have Stephen Harrison, the Chief Executive of Saul D. Harrison and Sons PLC, which trades as Harrison Wipes. And we also have you all, and I'd like to remind you all, we will leave some time for Q&A at the end. So please do submit questions via the chat box. And please do share thoughts and tweets on social media as you see fit, please. And so with that housekeeping done, I'd really like to move quickly to the session by first asking Verity to take us through what this year's report shows. So Verity, take us away, please.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for everyone for joining today's webinar. So I'm going to do a quick 5-minute overview of some of the key findings from our report, Executive Survey 2022, Harnessing Agility and Resilience. So if I can just ask for the first slide, please. So really pleasing to report that actually 2022 looks to be quite a positive outlook for the manufacturing industry. After quite a challenging 2021, manufacturers are of the view that conditions for the sector are set to improve. In fact, 3/4 of companies that we surveyed said they expect conditions for their industry to improve this year, with just 7% expecting a decline in conditions. Also, 3/4 of companies actually expect that the opportunities will outweigh the risks this year, and we look forward to hearing from the panel later about both those opportunities and risks. Manufacturers also reported quite significant increases in permanent employees this year, so quite a change from what we've seen in the last 2 years, particularly in 2020, when we saw quite large-scale redundancies, as well as increases in productivity and sales. Talent and technology are very much the priority investments for this year, with companies committing to recruiting apprentices and investing training, particularly in upskilling and retraining existing members of staff. And when it comes to the technologies, we see that over half of companies are planning to invest in digital technologies such as AI, automotive, automation, robotics and cobotics. And likewise, they're also planning to invest in capital equipment, no doubt spurred on by the government's initiatives around the super deduction and the AIA to really spur on investment programmes. However, this optimism has been tempered somewhat by escalating input costs, and actually increased input costs and access to skills is the biggest risk for manufacturers in 2022. Now, when it came to those risks, around 56% of companies said that the risks they see this year have actually changed from last year, but there are some long-standing challenges that remain. And perhaps the most longest standing challenge is, of course, access to skills. That was the most commonly cited challenge for companies in the year ahead. Almost half reported significant upward pressures on input costs, and just the same number again actually said that they were concerned about capacity within their supply chain, particularly around sourcing energy. And if we take all those together, it's no surprise that 2/5 of companies said they were concerned about just the overall increased cost of doing business, including employment-related costs. So what our survey also found were 3 kind of common themes for the year. And the first was around going green, where the transition to net zero is really beginning. So almost 2/3 of companies agree this year their business will focus more on net zero. And actually, the events of COP26, the pandemic itself and our full exit from the EU has actually accelerated those plans. Half of companies say they plan to invest in green technologies and energy efficiency measures in 2022. And overall, what we see is very strong sentiments to create environmental improvements across the manufacturing sector. And manufacturers ranked recycling, resource use, and carbon emissions as the highest areas that their company will focus on to make more positive changes over the course of the next year. Now, the second theme that we found was around securing skills. So if I can just move to this next slide, great. I'm focusing really on recruitment and retention, and perhaps this is no surprise given that challenge around access to domestic skills. So almost 9 in 10 companies said they were concerned about skills leaving their business, and around the same number again were concerned that actually they'll lose people completely from the manufacturing industry at a time when still we have a high number of unfilled vacancies. Now, to mitigate these risks, 2/3 of companies said they were going to increase basic pay, and actually Make UK's pay bulletin published earlier this week showed that pay settlements are on the rise, and actually companies are paying quite significant premiums to hold on to top talent. We also see the commitment to invest in training staff, in career development plans, and a lot of succession planning too. And that moves us on quite nicely to the number of companies, around 6 in 10, who are actually committing to recruit an engineering apprentice this year. And that's all about making sure we also have that future pipeline of talent available. And finally, companies are looking at offering greater flexibility when it comes to working patterns and arrangements. And that brings me on nicely to the third and final theme, which is around adapting to change. Now, I mentioned just then around offering greater flexibility in terms of working patterns and arrangements. And we see that now across the manufacturing business, of course, more so in the kind of non-production roles. But what companies are also doing are changing those working patterns more formally. So 1 in 3 said they've put short-term plans in place for more agile and hybrid working, and around 15% have made those changes permanent. But the other change we've of course had to adapt to is the complete exit from the EU, which no doubt will spark lots of discussion later. Now, perhaps for me, one of the starkest figures from this survey is that 2/3 of manufacturers said that the UK's now complete exit from the EU has either moderately or significantly hampered their business. Over half are concerned around the new rules on customs and the changes to product labelling, and 1 in 3 pointed towards EU regulations such as REACH as a major risk to their business. And of course, still lockdowns and national lockdowns or local lockdowns are still in the back of companies' minds. We hope to build on those green shoots of recovery, but I think there still remains a number of risks that companies are facing this year, and we need to look at how we're going to mitigate those. So on that note, Dan, I will hand back over to you and look forward to some discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Verity. That's I mean, a really interesting report this year, I think, and really timely as well as we go into 2022. And it's huge. And I think what it does show is this sort of incredible uncertainty, really. You know, there's any number of tailwinds pushing the industry forward, but these headwinds as well, as you point out, of Brexit and skills and input costs and so on. And to come into more depth into those areas, I'm going to come now to Cara and Stephen. I mean, Stephen, I just want to start with you, obviously representative of the manufacturing industry broadly in this country. I mean, take us through, I mean, in many ways, the headlines are pretty positive, aren't they? I mean, there's intention to invest, intention to skill up, intention to put into technology. This is a pretty positive report overall. So is the industry powering out the pandemic in a way that you're reasonably pleased with, or as pleased as you could be?
Dan,
absolutely.
Good morning.
Sorry, which Stephen?
Which Stephen do you want? Me to go down? Or
oh, sorry, Stephen Phipson, yes.
Right, good, okay.
Sorry, Stephen.
Good, yes. So overall, Dan, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. But overall, of course, the manufacturing sector has always been very resilient. So that's one thing we saw in the previous financial crisis, for example, in terms of coming back quite quickly. And we have to bear in mind that we saw overall about a 10% reduction in manufacturing output in the country last year. And these positive effects here are showing probably we're going to get back about 6% of that in growth this year. So we are in a recovery mode, there's no doubt about it. What's interesting to me about some of these results is there is a kind of change in the way people are thinking about this coming out of the pandemic, and particularly in terms of investment intentions. We're seeing, and I think this is quite interesting, we're seeing a lot more focus on supply chain resilience, as Verity mentioned. And this is around, can we onshore, can we do more vertical integration, can we be less reliant on those very expensive freight costs? And a lot of thought processes is going into those boardrooms at the moment about supply chain resilience, and some very interesting investments taking place around that, which is one thing that we're seeing. And on skill shortages, if we take certain sectors like food and drink manufacturing, we are seeing quite a lot of investments going in more into automation now. You know, how do we mitigate the fact we can't get hold of that labor anymore? Let's automate more of the processes. So what you're seeing is a kind of change of sentiment there, and a change of focus to be able to, and it's under the sort of heading of adaptation and agility, really, in how we adapt to these new environments. And I think that's really, really important to get hold of, as well as some of the new things. We talk about net zero, for example, and we often think about greening those factories and greening those processes and making the emissions from the factories less. But the opportunity is around the new products that are required for a net zero economy. And we're seeing more and more boardroom discussions now about how they change their R&D program.
Stephen, sorry, you froze there for a
second there, and how we produce products that are fit for a net zero economy. And I think that's really interesting. It's a change of sentiment from what we saw about 18 months ago. So there's a lot of lessons that have come from the pandemic, but I see some really positive aspects there in the way that people are thinking about the future. And I think that puts us in good stead, and it underlines the resilience of the sector, I think, Dan.
Yeah. Cara, and to build on that, I mean, there is this broad optimism, which is clearly tempered with some concerns as well. I mean, where do you see the balance lying? As you know, if 2022 is a sort of start of the comeback, I mean, are you confident that companies are in the right place, have the right financial resources and the right sort of mental resources to deal with this situation?
Yeah, I think it's certainly been, as you started off, Dan, with it's definitely been a couple of years of turmoil and lots going on. So I think, you know, our manufacturing industry can be a bit tired and kind of going, right, okay. But actually, I think what was interesting was they were describing a kind of new set of opportunities and a new set of risks from the last couple of years. I think the interesting part is to Stephen's point of the opportunities. So I think people are very focused on that. And I think what's really good is the positivity that's coming across. The new product development and the amount of investment in that is not always what we see. So when I've been in this industry for a good while, and actually the amount of responses about that's where investment was going to go is really, really exciting, because actually I think as we bring new product to market, as we think about these new markets, then that's something that we should all be very excited about for our country. However, you know, I have to say that the one thing that overarches all of that is the talent and the amount of investment going into talent and skills. And certainly in the clients that I've been speaking to over the last 2 years, but certainly over the last year, you know, the amount of time that people are spending on people issues and people and culture, and you know, bringing people back and office work part of their office compared to their operations and all these things, you know, a massive amount of time on people and talent. And I think we need to continue to help our manufacturers with the skills plans and the reskilling that needs to go into that.
Yeah, we're going to dive a bit more into skills and with Stephen Harrison a little bit later on as well. But I mean, just in terms of the overarching cost of it all, there, because there's cost of, you know, there's wages going up. We know that input prices are going up, as your survey shows, and we've seen inflation today, 5.4%, you know, highest in 30 years. And you know, energy prices going up 40%. You've got national insurance coming down the line in April. I mean, at what point do manufacturers to say, well, look, we can't make money out of this anymore, or is that not really an issue for you?
I think we're certainly seeing price increases, and we're seeing our manufacturers having to ask for those price increases and getting them. And actually some of our clients have had to ask for those much more than they have in the past. So, you know, that is having to be passed on. That can be uncomfortable for people on either end. Actually, people don't want to be asking that of their customers, but there is a need, and the price inflation is definitely there. So, you know, and exporting, I suppose, is the other thing that people are having to be thoughtful about, to really go for the markets where they can get the opportunity. So I think you're totally right that is something that is focused on, and I think people don't see an end to that at the moment. So that is a real, you know, a concern for 2022.
Yeah, and so Stephen, is that the number one thing in terms of your mind of the things worrying your members at the moment? And what else is on the list there? And just quickly, what can the government do here? So I've got two MPs on the call. I mean, so take us through, and then if you can just take us through your views on where the government sits in this quandary.
So we've seen some substantial cost increases. To Cara's point, in the last quarter of last year, we saw margin recovery in the sector. So this indicated price increases. So we have hard data to show that. I think, you know, we did in our discussions with government think about inflation being transitory. That was, if you remember, last quarter of last year, people were saying, well, it's all temporary. Bank of England, it's going to go away in the new year, so don't worry about it too much. What we're seeing now is it's baked in. So we're seeing that now as hard price increases, and we're seeing, you know, that going forward with many sectors. Some sectors that's not possible, but in a lot of sectors in manufacturing, we are seeing those margin recovery now. So that inflationary cycle is actually baked into it. I think further escalation is a problem. Talking to government, obviously a lot of our discussion with the Secretaries of State and the Chancellor has been around energy costs at the moment. And that's been a real challenge for many of those energy intensive sectors in particular, and will continue to be a challenge. We'll see where we get to with that. Although I would say we're probably not going to see very much movement on that. We'll see more of that being focused on the consumers, and obviously the more vulnerable in society being looked after first by government, which is right. But for industry, that can be a drag on growth effectively and a drag on investment. So that's there. And I think it's about the messages around our competitiveness against our European neighbours, basically. So if you looked at energy costs in steel making or cement making, basically we're sort of 50% higher than they are. So it's how you address that disparity, I think, is the focus on energy costs. And of course, we've mentioned the TCA with the EU. Obviously, we work very, very hard with governments about that. I mean, our message is always about improving the conditions. There's many, many detailed discussions going on a weekly basis about things that we need to improve that situation. But at the moment, we've seen about a 17% drop in our EU trade, which, as you remember, is a large part of integrated manufacturing for the UK. About 40% of our exports go to the EU, so it's an important part of what we do. And this year, unless we do some changes, we're going to see a further 10% drop in that EU trade. So there's a real push on what we can do about changing that dynamic, how we can improve the conditions on the TCA to make it easier for manufacturers to access those. And these aren't finished products, these are integrated parts of the supply chain that we do with the EU, which is vital to UK manufacturing. The other point with government is skills. So we've seen a lot of intentions here to hire apprenticeships. Whenever I talk to chief execs at the moment, it's about vocational skills. We've done very well with high-level engineers. It's CNC setters and tool makers and vocational skills that are absolutely vital at the moment and in short supply. And whilst we have a lot of good intentions here from businesses, we do need to see a lot more ambition from government, and they know my position very clearly on this, on things like the apprentice levy and what we're doing about that. And so they are listening, they are engaged, and we expect to make some progress on those things this year.
Great. I'm going to move to our MPs now to respond to that. In true Hustings fashion, Mark, I'm going to start with you. I mean, Stephen's there talking about he wants to see ambition from the government. Just give us your thoughts about where manufacturing sits in the thinking of Whitehall at the moment, and whether or not you think that the right levers are in place for growth this year.
Well, I think government takes manufacturing very seriously. I mean, one of the things we've done as the all-party parliamentary manufacturing group, where, of course, my joint chair was Jack Dromey, and Jack, of course, will be a sad loss. And it's you know, he did some fantastic work. So I'm very, very sad that we've lost Jack. But our job as the all-party group has been to raise the profile of manufacturing. One of the things that interested me is that those economies with a high proportion of manufacturing have bounced back faster than those with higher levels of services. And we can see that, in fact, in this survey with the confident level of that manufacturers are indicating. I'm not sure that would be the case with many service businesses who don't have the customers on the high streets to to service. So I think it is an important sector for government, and they understand the pressures they face. In addition to the all-party group, I'm involved on the BEIS Select Committee, and I'll just pick out one point, if I may, from what Verity was talking about, was the plan to invest in digital and robotics. The BEIS Select Committee did an inquiry on that, and we discovered that in the UK we've got incredibly low levels of robotics, and that's because business owners think that a robotic solution to a problem is usually much more expensive than it actually is. And the second point is that they are often think that it can't be flexible, that if it's used for product A, it can't be modified to product B, and of course it can. And if we're starting from an incredibly low base, but we just need to do more on that. And I know that from a company involved in robotics who have a site in my constituency. I've also got quite a close connection to the packaging industry, and I had a meeting with that sector yesterday. And one of the impressions I got from them was that during the COVID period, it was easier to pass on price increases. People understand that there was a pandemic, a crisis, and customers were more willing to accept price increases. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic and coming to a more normal business environment, the message I'm getting is it's rather harder to get those price increases through. And of course, the biggest single price that many businesses are facing is energy, because there is no industrial supply price cap. There's a domestic price cap, which will be the subject of a lot of writing, I'm sure, in 3 or 4 weeks' time when it gets set. But businesses, particularly those that haven't hedged, are already paying substantially higher prices. And I was pleased to hear from Verity that businesses are looking at going green and looking at energy efficiency. And if there's one thing that drives efficiency in a business, it's when a particular cost component is increased in price, and you look at how efficiently we're using it.
Well, Mark, that's been brilliant. I'm going to come back to you after. I'm going to come to Seema for a few comments, then maybe come back to you just quickly. But Seema, I mean, Mark outlined some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities there. But we've had a 12-month period where the government has effectively kiboshed the industrial strategy as was, which was a bit of a blow to many manufacturers, and brought in the plan for growth, which is, depending on how you look at it, greater or lesser in its content. Tell me, do you think the government's doing enough to support the industry?
Thank you very much. Look, it is a pleasure to follow Mark, and may I also just echo his words about Jack Dromey, who we miss hugely and was a big voice in this space. Look, Mark and I will have areas in which we agree, but there will also be areas in which we will diverge. And one is on the government's track record. I personally think it's unforgivable that the government has shown a total lack of leadership on industrial strategy at a time when we need it the most. Because when times are challenging, you need to look to where the future is going to be. And you need to make sure that there is a clear strategy that's involving industry and working with industry. In my view, one of the primary purposes of government is to be able to help the nation plan ahead to help navigate the macroeconomic challenges that may be being experienced, but also how to help with some certainty so that business and industry can plan ahead. And I do think that coming out of the pandemic, we have two challenges as to where we remain competitive. One is dealing with the challenges that unexpectedly in some areas that the pandemic has led to, and for example around skills and sort of some very unexpected behaviours in the labour market as well. As some people have withdrawn from the labour market, and now we see the vacancy rates that we do as well. But secondly, the lack of forward planning to make Brexit work. I think this is a story that's going to unfold. And I think it is important and critical, in fact, that the government gets a grip on this, because it is affecting confidence to export. It is affecting the prices of raw materials and part finished goods and other supplies that may have come in from Europe. And I don't think we can pretend it's going to go away without some planning about how there is some close work with industry, further negotiation, and a clear view about how we have a post-Brexit industrial strategy that works. I also think we need a very clear view about how we're going to invest in the bigger ticket items of the future. Because what I've also heard in discussions in the last month or two is that whilst there is an intent and a desire to invest by business, there's also a sort of a halt being put on business investment at the moment because of the uncertainties of other cost pressures this year. There is not an integrated strategy from the government about dealing with the combined cost pressures on business, which is driving inflation as well as driving kind of the cost of living crisis for consumers. But I think we need an integrated strategy. We absolutely need to cancel the jobs tax in April, because it's going to come at a time when there's going the recovery from the difficult Omicron period as well is going to be severe. But I think what we need to see as well is a proactive strategy, because look, we want to be optimistic and we've got to be optimistic. And I'm actually very optimistic about what Britain can do over the next period. But it needs to have a clear strategy. And at the moment, I think on skills, which is the issue highlighted today, and may I thank Make UK and PwC for the report, was also highlighted in the roundtable that I held with Make UK before Christmas. Look, there needs to be an integrated skills strategy with the funding behind it. There has been an enormous level of cuts since around 50% in real terms to the further education budget since 2010. Some of that has led to the lack of resilience that we have now. But we need an integrated strategy on skills that goes right from the top with the reskilling of employees already in the workplace, the upskilling of adults as well, to take to be able to be equipped for the technological change that's coming. The development of new products, as we've talked about today, is only going to be possible with the development of new skills and capabilities, and those to be anchored alongside industry and research institutions, and funding for research also being increased, which we have called for. But just a final word on skills, I think an important call that we have made, and indeed Toby Perkins, our shadow apprenticeships minister, has also been discussing with the national manufacturing task force, is to urge the government to set up task force across the country in specific sectors, because some of the response has got to be for the economy as a whole, but a lot has to be with us building strong capability to be competitive in the sectors where we're going to need those products coming out and the services that will go alongside them in the future. And we've got to do that as a strategy. It isn't good enough to say we're going to start with more institutes of technology that are going to be piecemeal and put in some, not necessarily strategic locations, but how are we going to have a levelling up agenda that's looking at an economic agenda that's under the umbrella of an overall industrial strategy, with a really strong world-class skill strategy underpinning that goes from the cradle to career, and that is working with industry, as government must do and should do, on how we address together the challenges of the future. That's how we'll remain with a strong manufacturing sector, tackle the challenges together, but have the service industry that goes alongside that, because the two are very integrated.
I thank you so much, Seema. That's a fulsome answer, and I'd be remiss if I didn't come back to Mark and ask him to respond. I mean, I'm particularly interested in your views about whether or not there should be some reformation of the industrial strategy to give a bit more targeted approach to a lot of these areas that Seema mentioned.
Well, I think government has supported business and industry pretty broadly. I mean, the businesses I speak to are incredibly grateful and supportive of what government did in terms of grants. I mean, we've spent 2 years really going through a crisis period. In other circumstances, a vast number of our businesses without support will have failed, and the support was made available by government, and I think that business people generally appreciate that, and I would agree with Seema about the early stages of the Brexit deal. Of course, the deal was done at the last minute and took effect very quickly, and certainly I spoke to businesses who were bothered about what the future was, but I hear nothing but praise from them now about the information that's available to them from forgive me, businesses about to start, that's available to them through gov.uk. And whilst change is always difficult, the businesses I've spoken to generally have worked out a way of doing things, and businesses are perhaps more resilient than we sometimes give them credit for.
Hopefully we'll have time to come back to you about a bit more about skills, because I really want to touch on net zero before we do that. And I should also say to the audience, we're very thankful to have the MPs here today. It's an incredibly busy day for them. as many of you know, it's PMQs and quite a crucial one in half an hour's time. But first of all, I want to come to Adam now, just to talk about one of the key areas in the report, which is net zero. It's quite clear that this is a major factor, major, it's something on the mind of all companies and manufacturers, particularly, I think, going through this next stage of growth. So, but Adam, just take us through your thoughts about this area, about how you see manufacturers evolving towards a greater net zero approach. And then maybe we could talk a little bit about the government as well and what the policy framework's like.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, very happy to, and can talk in doing that about some of our research. And for those who maybe don't know, Onward, we're a centre-right think tank about boosting economic opportunity, repairing the social fabric of communities and producing practical and politically feasible policy ideas. And we've done significant research on this exact topic over the last couple of years. And our early report, Greening the Giants, highlighted the 12 sectors that were responsible for 3/5 of UK emissions, of which manufacturing was one. And the key point that we identified in that was that the regions most vulnerable to the net zero transition are the very same areas that have the most to benefit from the rollout of green technologies. And it's a point that's been made by politicians from all parties and kind of mayors like Andy Street, Ben Houchen, Jamie Driscoll, that if government's interested in levelling up, net zero is a big opportunity. So we really welcome the messages in the exec survey showing how seriously firms are taking this. As Verity said earlier, 2/3 saying it's either a top priority or a strong priority, and half planning investments in the next 12 months. So the thing that we're really thinking about and what we've looked at is what government can do to support those firms, the majority, that want to improve the environment, want to support in the race to net zero. And let me just touch on 3 areas very quickly. So firstly, innovation funding. We think that we're currently really underperforming on innovation relative to our competitors. Germany filed 250% more patents in environmentally related technologies than the UK between 2012 and 16. And agencies like Innovate UK haven't always been the route to finance that businesses need on this net zero challenge. So since 2004, Innovate UK have given 14% of their funding to clean growth and innovation, and the approval rate for firms stands at about 15%. So there's more to be done there to get funds to businesses to support them with some of these challenges. And schemes like Made Smarter have been fantastic in this space, but they're too small in scale and they're lacking in certainty over the long term. So in the West Midlands, the pilot recently was 2 million over 6 months, and we need more investment, more certainty, so that businesses know they can lean into some of these schemes. And so in innovation, I think programs like Made Smarter should be expanded, should be broadened, and a significant portion of the announced uplift in R&D should be focused on business-led R&D and innovation projects in places where public intensity of R&D has been really low to date, places like the Midlands and the North, the West Midlands and the Northeast particularly. Second area is market stimulation around new energy technology. So rightly a big focus in the discussion so far about the imminent crisis and pressure on energy costs. And your exec survey shows that the second highest priority around reducing environmental damage is on energy and energy improvements. Over the medium and long term, government are going to need to take more action to bring forward and to reduce the costs of technologies that will help firms to do this. Some of the research we cite indicates that by 2050, industrial emissions abatement is going to be cut in 3 ways: about 30% for electrification, 20% for hydrogen, and about 50% for carbon capture and storage. There's been great progress in the last 20 years on electricity generation through government intervention in the renewables market, but hydrogen and carbon capture and storage are still nowhere near where they need to be viable options for businesses to adopt and reduce their costs. And so we've recommended government broaden some of the mechanisms that they've used in order to reduce costs around renewables and electrification, things like contract for difference. And we were really pleased that they did so for the hydrogen market. Now they need to do so for carbon capture and storage to try and make those technologies more easy to adopt. And the final area I'll touch on very briefly, because there's been discussion of it so far and will be in a moment, is around skills. So we did a lot of work in a report called Qualifying for the Race to Net Zero on skills for the environmental challenge. And it shows there's a twofold challenge here. So one is around those low to medium skilled workers, those vocational skills that Stephen was talking about. And there is a challenge around high skilled workers. So in the medium and long term, how do we get the PhDs in this country that are bringing forward technologies to then be implemented by those vocational workers? And we find that the average skill level of net zero jobs is 26% higher than the current average occupational skill level in the UK. So those wage premiums that come from net zero focused jobs aren't being realised. The government have done some good work to date on this. So the 2.5 billion National Skills Fund, including that lifetime skills guarantee, these are good steps. The challenge now is around delivery, and firms can only be as agile as the government are in approving which particular firms and courses and qualifications can be used. So we were pleased to see after the Green Jobs Task Force more green qualifications approved for the lifetime skills guarantee and for apprenticeships. I think, as Seema rightly says, there needs to be a more integrated approach to make sure there's an alignment between skills funding and the skills that are needed for net zero. And we've also said the government could go further on encouraging businesses to invest in this, or providing funds for businesses to invest. And we've called for a green human capital tax credit that would work similarly to an R&D tax credit, allowing firms to write off costs for investing in specific qualifications that aid in the race to net zero, and the public purse benefiting from the spillovers that would generate. So those three areas there are ones we think it's really important for government to focus on: innovation, market stimulation, and skills. Your survey really clearly shows that firms want to do the right thing, and so we're just interested in how government can support those firms in reaching those aims.
We're very clear about what can be achieved. I mean, but just before we move on, I mean, what appetite do you detect in government to back this with real money? I mean, it feels that, you know, I read the 10-point plan, and I'm sure you have Kwasi Kwarteng's 10-point plan in this area, and a lot of it is sort of aspirational at best. Do you think they're actually going to commit some real money as opposed to cutting the grants on electric vehicles and so on, and going backwards on some of these matters?
I think the quantum that was outlined in the spending review around this is sufficient is probably too far, but will make significant progress if it is deployed in the right way. So let's take electric vehicles, for example. My sense is that if, as currently occurs, the electric vehicle charging scheme is delivered centrally through subsidies, then it's going to struggle to get the post it needs to in local areas. We've called in previous reports for devolving some of those funds down to local authorities and regional authorities, so that they can use insight from the ground, have closer relationships with planners and others, in order to deploy charging networks. So I think that the money is there and has been announced by government. The challenge now is delivering it and getting it out to firms and communities. And that's where I think the Levelling Up white paper is going to potentially fill in some of the gaps there on how a government can get some of this funding to the front line. Yeah, a lot resting on that Levelling Up white paper now, it feels. Increasing importance by the hour. Excellent. Well, Mark, I'm going to come to you next before going back to Seema, for some views on, as Adam said, the skills agenda, but also net zero, I think, which is really important for government, as we know. And I just to frame this, I wish a question from the audience to assure you that we are taking those questions. It says, you know, according to the Make PwC survey, 72% of manufacturers ranked innovation as the most important skill. How do we provide practical innovation skills that can be applied and then measured properly as an output? There's a lot of questions coming in on skills and the importance of skills and the importance that government can provide on skills. So take us through your thoughts on this, Mark.
Well, in terms of skills and innovation, I'm delighted that the government have maintained the investment in the catapult centres. I have one in my constituency, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and there are some brilliant ideas and some brilliant training taking place there. On skills, one of the things that interests me as somebody who ran a business is making certain that when people are trained and they come into a business, they are work ready. I think far too often businesses are expecting to take somebody with a certain skill level, but having to spend a lot of time in investing and boosting those skills. So I think that's a matter of considering how the training is delivered. And I'm also very keen that we do more with our LEPs in getting business owners and manufacturers into schools at an early stage We want the brightest and best of our young people to consider careers in manufacturing. Historically, they haven't done so. I think there's a big piece on the careers advice and support that we give at a very early stage through school. So I think there is a great deal to do there. But we're heading in the right direction. There are opportunities, but I would be first to acknowledge that there is more that we can do.
And is the skill agenda going to be focused? How much can it be focused on these emerging technologies, on I don't know, carbon capture and hydrogen, and the sort of the innovation needs to go around that? Are you confident that we're developing the right sort of the right education?
We're probably not doing so at pace, but as Sally on the Base Select Committee, we're looking at methods of decarbonising our homes, our businesses, our industrial processes. There is a real energy and a real focus in it here in Westminster. I'm not sure that is translating its way down to skills and encouraging young people to go into those sectors. And I think there does need to be some rather more joined up thinking in how we do that. But I do think that one of the things we identified in the all-party manufacturing group is the role of LEPs. We need to, they're variables. There are some parts of the country where they're brilliant. I would put Coventry and Warwickshire in my own area as being a very strong LEP. Other areas were perhaps less so. And we need to turbocharge that relationship, because that's bringing business people and manufacturers together with politicians. We don't want this entire agenda to be run by politicians. We need people with practical experience driving these forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic, Mark. And
would you excuse me now as if I rush off to the chamber?
Of course. Good luck today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seema, take us through. You're hopefully can stick around a little bit longer, but take us through your thoughts. I mean, you mentioned Labour's policy around this already, but take us through into a bit more detail about how that would work. And clearly this is a really important thing. Things like levelling up. It's so important for this country to have a solid, innovative manufacturing base, isn't it?
That's absolutely right, Dan. And look, let me say, I think we're in the slow lane on innovation. There are areas that we do incredibly well, but overall, we don't have the strong culture of innovation that we need. And I think that's partly because we don't have a joined up plan in government. I feel incredibly frustrated by this. I will say incredibly frustrated, because I do feel that there is a kind of real demand for this from and clarity and some joined up thinking from universities, from business, from industry, and from different sectors. But I do feel that a lot of innovation seems to happen in silos. And it isn't strategic, based around where our country needs to change, where we need to be competitive. If I take aviation as one example, look, really great work going on. The Cranfield Institute, Aerospace Institute, really great work going on sustainable aviation fuels, really great work going on at the Whittle Lab in Cambridge, Airbus and others innovating in different parts of the country. But there is no clear joined up plan about how we are going to be world leaders in, for example, greening aviation that is much more than sustainable aviation fuels. That is part of how you might have aircraft run on different fuels, but it isn't how you're going to transform travel and transport to be quicker and easier, combined with where you might not need to use transport as much because you can use other technologies, whether that is using technology to transform how we do cargo, and new ideas from Magway and other companies about how you might have small tunnels to do some automated transfers of goods around the country that could be greener. Look, there's a whole agenda that doesn't have leadership. And what strikes me is there's an opportunity for us as a nation to spot those really big ticket items where, if we develop some of the answers, and which comes from a really rigorous analysis of where where technology is able to drive change, but also where consumer and business demands might also be affecting the need for transformation, then we need a plan and we need strategies led by government for those that are much heavier weight than the documents that we have published at the moment from the government. And for that reason, there's a lot of making it up as you go along. LEPs are not the answer. They are part of an answer in some areas, but they aren't across the country, and they don't have the links into where the innovation really is coming from. So I think we need to be much more strategic as a nation. I think we need to see what we need to do is not just respond to where the challenges are today, but we need to be building our answer to the challenges of tomorrow, so that our industries are going to remain competitive and be world leaders. And I will say that one of the just in sort of closing on some of this, look, I've been working and discussing a lot of need for change and just transition with the steel sector, particularly through last summer, where the government was very close, very slow to act when the Trade Remedies Agency changes were coming in. So, this on subsidies and how we're going to support our sectors, is all very, very important, because it's part of long-term planning, and that is not something that the government does well. But the reason why we put forward a £28 billion extra investment that's needed annually for 10 years as a policy at Labour conference is because we recognise that investment has to be at scale, and it has to be over a long period of time. And it has to be within the context of the best minds in the country, at grassroots level and at tops of universities and in Whitehall, saying, how are we going to have the answers? The reason why that's important is because jobs on the ground are going to depend on it. And you need to involve schools, you need to involve careers advice in this, schools like Space Studio in Feltham. Their success for their pupils is going to depend on strong engagement from industry for where the needs of the future are going to come from. Because let's face it, the kids at school today who are teenagers are going to be your PhDs in 10 years' time. And how are we having a proper integrated strategy if we're looking to 2030 for what needs to happen and who's going to be leading it, and how we have a very integrated way of an alignment between skills, industrial strategy and investment.
Yeah. Excellent. Seema, thank you so much for again a really good framing of some of the objectives there. And Stephen Harrison, waiting very patiently for us to come to you. Apologies for that. I can ask you some more pointed questions, but first of all, I'd love you just to respond to all the things you've been sitting there hearing from the two parties, from the government, from the industry, from Make UK and PwC and the report itself. Sitting there stewing potentially about some of the, what do you make of it all? And there's skills, the net zero, there's productivity, there's the need to invest. From a manufacturing point of view, what are you on the ground? What is happening?
I think everything, everything I've heard so far today, to largely resonates with me in the world that I live in. All the challenges that are there are definitely real. The ones, for example, around costs are factual. Things like sea freight, things like energy, etc. And on that count, absolutely, customers, because they're aware of the cost changes globally, it is a lot easier to have that conversation with people. I do think there's massive optimism. I do think we as a business, and we're a 130-year-old business that's been through a few crises in the past, we do see the future as being very optimistic. I do feel that if we grab the opportunities that are there, things that are being discussed around net zero, about upskilling our workforce, about supply chain development, customer development, I think there's absolutely definitely every reason for us to be optimistic. On the net zero, I think there needs to be some developments in our world. And Mark Pawsey, sort of his history, his company was in food disposables, and we touch into that world. Compostability is a massive conversation for products, but when you actually say, when a customer says, well, where will I compost products? The answer is the country doesn't have composting facilities that will, that can be used. So there needs to be some more joined up thinking. And the last thing I'd say is, I think absolutely, as Seema was saying, there's lots of new developments and things that we should be doing better, could be doing better. But absolutely, there are a lot of great initiatives and opportunities out there from government, from universities, from organisations like Catapult. I think we should be, as a business, be looking to see what is available to us now in the next 1-3 years, etc., and make sure we can use it. and then allow organisations like Make UK and the all-party group, let them think beyond that. But I don't think we should discount the great opportunities and support that's available today, now, that we can take advantage of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are, that is, I mean, and Make UK very good about providing signposts towards those things, I think. But just quickly, things like skills. I mean, we talked about skills in the last bit of the session. I mean, are you finding that the people that you need are there to be recruited, and when they are there, are you finding that their wages, going up to a degree which alarms you in any way?
Well, I think first of all, people should be paid the right salary for the job that they're doing, and then the business needs to adjust itself accordingly. Absolutely, there are challenges, all the way from factory floor all the way up to sort of senior management. Absolutely, there are challenges, but again, what that does is when you're a challenge, you have to be, as the phrase here is, agile, flexible, resilient. You have to look at solutions. The world will bring me problems, and my job is to find the solution. And the solution for this is to look internally, make sure we maximise the potential of every individual, whether that through training or further education. I mean, that really is the absolute priority. And maybe if that's what it makes you do, is to look internally to find that resource rather than automatically going to recruit new, then it's a big positive for the individuals you employ and the country in general.
Yeah. And lastly, in terms of your investment strategy and what you think the manufacturing sector as a whole should be focused on, I mean, where are you putting your chips, as it were? Where is the money going to in terms of innovation and improvement?
I think absolutely it's going into new product development. We're in a wiping cloth business, so for example, the new wind farm approval up in Scotland, which is going to massively increase that industry, will present great opportunities. So how can we develop our products, our services to meet the future? That's absolutely where it's going. And compostability, products that can be composted, products that can be recycled. I mean, that's absolutely where the future is going to be.
Well, it's great that you are investing, as we've seen from the survey. Many other manufacturers are as well. And we will have some time. I'm going to put some more questions directly to you, Stephen. But for that, can I come at Stephen Phipson this time, and also Cara again? Just to start off, a very broad response to what we heard from our MPs today, Stephen, if possible, because as we all know, they're almost semi-trained in these hustling situations to have adversarial sort of positions. But I mean, what is the truth of the matter? Is the government doing what it needs to do, or is Labour there sort of in the wings, sort of shouting the right things, as it were?
There's a few comments I would make about that, Dan. First of all, it is not right that we stopped the industrial strategy. And I understand, I've spent many hours with Kwasi Kwarteng debating this, and I understand that it was, probably a bit out of date and it needed updating. But from that came good things. The catapults, which were mentioned by Mark, have been a fabulous thing for the sector. We've done a lot of innovation in technology with the catapults. In fact, our catapult system is now bigger than where we are with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. I mean, it's a really strong source of support for the sector. So we shouldn't discount that, which came as a result of it. Likewise, the sector deals were very strong. So, and the other thing which I keep pointing out to ministers is that manufacturing is a long-term game. It's not a short-term game. The average investment cycles are about 7 years in the manufacturing sector. And part of that is about having a long-term view as to where industrial policy is going to go. And whilst I do take the point that we have now the plan for growth, there is a lot of white space in the plan for growth, and there was a lot of detail in the industrial strategy. So whilst he's been at pains to reassure me that the local industrial strategies will continue, we're not tying this together. And my worry is that we're going to fragment into many individual policies. We have, for example, the enterprise strategy to come over the next few months. We have the levelling up white paper, which has got a large manufacturing element to come. And if we're not careful, we're going to have a fragmentation of policy. And what we need is a joined up policy. So I will continue to campaign for going back to, call it something else if you want to, but an integrated industrial strategy that links together these agendas. And of course, a key part of that is skills. And my challenge, as the same with Nadeem Zahawi, is the same challenge. We are just not ambitious enough on our skills agenda, particularly on vocational skills. The cuts that Seema talks about to further education are very apparent when it comes to delivering apprenticeships. and we need to do a lot more very quickly on that. So there's two big areas there, Dan, that I focus on very strongly with government and potential governments of all colours, but they understand very clearly where our priorities are.
Yeah, no allegiances at all. Cara, where you obviously had some really interesting stuff from Mark and Seema. I mean, where do you think the big strategic sort of decisions lie for governments and want-to-be governments?
Yeah, I'll not repeat a lot of what Stephen said, but I agree in terms of having that strategy there. I think for us, we talk a lot about productivity, and I don't think as a country we talk enough about that and understanding what that really means. You know, it takes us longer to produce than some of our European neighbours over any given week. And I think focusing on that and really getting, you know, manufacturers and our whole country understanding what that means and the opportunities there. Because if we're waiting for labour, it's not available, it's not coming. What do the businesses need to do differently to understand how they can keep that productivity up? I do agree, however, that we can't in each region all be great at the same things. So I think the strategy around how do we make sure that each of the regions is focused on the right things, building up through some of the centres their own expertise and the skills is where I think that's important. To really understand that and make sure that we get the benefit of that, because if we're competing all the time, I don't think that, in my view anyway, is good for the country as a whole. And actually that would help a levelling up agenda, we'd hope, and also a focus on green jobs, social mobility in that green jobs, as well as the reskilling for the future needs both government and private sector work. Yeah, and Seema's point, that he needs an overarching sort of strategy, an overarching vision of things to link things up, I guess. We've got, and Seema just apologised to me on private chat. She's had to go off to the House as well to listen to the Prime Minister and his views on things as he fights to save his job, depending on who you read. The other key area, I think, because we're looking at the questions now, looking at the Q&A coming in. Thank you so much for sending those in. And the other key area seems to be the supply chain, really. I think the supply chain is coming up again and again, the questions. And I'm going to read out a couple of them and then come maybe to the two Stephens, Cara, others, as you see fit. So there's one which is, how can government facilitate the long-term strategic planning around supply chain resilience in critical areas such as semiconductors, where we're heavily exposed to the Far East. Many governments like Japan and US, according to the questioner, are working with like sort of TMSC to set up domestic production capabilities. How can the government sort of provide a backdrop to this strategic resilience? And then also the second question is, how much is the geopolitics coming into the calculation when it comes to reviewing supply chain arrangements for manufacturers? Stephen Harrison, just quickly to you. I mean, obviously, as someone who's got the global operations, I mean, how do you see the supply chain at the moment? We know shipping is clearly deeply disrupted still. So, take us through how it works for you and what you think the government can do to provide some sort of resilience in the chain.
I'm not sure I'm necessarily qualified to actually answer the point of the question, but certainly the supply chain with sea freight has meant that an expected delivery time of 4 weeks has gone up to anything sort of 10, 11, 12 weeks, which has made everything from predictability of stock to productivity, production, a real challenge. I think the challenge we've got, and I see people around me, is we would love to bring sourcing of products back to Europe, back to the UK. That would be absolutely my priority. It would make my life an awful lot easier. I would get better trading terms if I was trading closer to home than I would in the Far East. But the real challenge is there is a significant increase in cost to achieve that. And whilst the end customers are addicted to price being the main criteria, we can put forward, and we do put forward, European source solutions. But unless the customer's willing to actually pay for it, I can't do any more than I'm currently doing as an individual business owner, which is a great shame.
Yeah. Stephen Phipson, now, I mean, supply chain clearly a huge issue for everyone, and we know the last 2 years have been particularly troublesome for obvious reasons. I mean, what can the government do to help the resilience there? And what can companies do? Because we can't really rely on the government.
No, we can't. And what we do, and we might talk for a minute on semiconductors, but what we can do, what we are seeing with businesses is this whole focus on supply chain resilience, Dan. So this is where people are looking at, can we vertically integrate as long as the cost benefit is right? Can we actually do things ourselves, which we're currently outsourcing? A lot of companies going down that route. And this whole idea of onshoring is quite interesting. Although a number of larger companies have said to me, if you're an inward investor into the UK, you get full support from government, you get a project manager, you get grants and everything else. But if you're a UK manufacturer trying to bring back some manufacturing and expand a factory, there's no support available for that whatsoever. So is there a change in policy that would aid that process? That's another question that's coming up quite strongly. And on the big items like semiconductors. Now, it's worth thinking about what that means to us. So obviously we have automotive is a good example of that. So in the automotive world, we don't tend to buy semiconductors for the cars. What we do is we buy electronic systems. So Bosch in Germany is the big supplier of, for example, fuel injection systems. So actually what they're looking at is, it's very much more important the German government sources those, gets the right sourcing for that semiconductors and then pushes it through the supply chain. So it's quite interesting that actually the Europeans are clubbing together to try to develop semiconductor autonomy, and the Americans are as well, trying to develop their own fabs. And as we know, because we've been there before, I'm long enough in my career to remember Newt Naycliffe and Tony Blair and the 750 million we invested in trying to do fabs on semiconductor scale ourselves. These require billions a year of investment. It's a real, I mean, the Taiwanese example, which is where Taiwan and China is where a lot of the semiconductors come from. The governments there have been investing tens of billions every year for the last 20 years to develop that capability. We're unlikely to do that, but the Europeans are now clubbing together to do something similar in Europe, which would move that supply chain a bit closer to home, which is something that a lot of the larger manufacturers in particular are watching and supporting through their European part. So even though we've done Brexit, Dan, I suspect Europe will continue to be, and actually probably be even more important in terms of a source of supply with these large government initiatives to be more resilient into the future.
Yeah. Cara, sitting in Belfast, I mean, how does it feel to you over there, given Northern Ireland Protocol, which is still very much in its formative stages?
Yeah, and I think it's certainly been interesting from being where I'm from, and also looking at this industry and seeing the difference. And actually, I suppose from my point of view, seeing how companies very quickly adapt to the rules on offer, so therefore they change quite quickly. And I think that's something that certainly when I speak to clients, it gets me very proud of how our manufacturing community do just kind of, right, okay, that's what it is, we need to know, now we'll go and do this. But it is a lot of effort, and clearly I think as we look forward, it's about the certainty, and I think that comes back to the whole piece here about our manufacturers can be really agile and resilient. They can be across their supply chain, but it can be a bit exhausting sometimes, and just when is it certain, so that they know what they're planning for, I think is really important in what I see. Dan.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, I think that's a nice moment to end on. I think that the survey clearly shows that agility is baked into the industry. So it's just a question of hopefully seeing this year pan out with the investment that we've seen being reported and the optimism that's clearly there. I'm going to end the session because I think we should all turn over now to PMQs to see what's going to go on there with our two members of our panel from earlier. But I'm going to end with it's less of a question, but more of a kind of statement of hope from Steve Blythe, or a question who he poses to the panel, I suppose. But I'm going to read it out like a statement. He says, "We're an optimistic manufacturing SME, and to echo Stephen Phipson's comments, please can we move to a constructive cross-party and national promotion of innovation and manufacturing in the UK and develop a joined-up industrial and educational strategy." Wouldn't that be great?
Absolutely. Perfect.
So with that, I'm going to end. Thank you so much to the panel today, the two Stephens, Verity, Adam, Cara, the MPs, sadly we've lost today, but for obvious reasons. Busy day. I'll let you all go, but thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll do it again next year.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.